The mayor of Baltimore chastises the media and the general public for Monday morning quarterbacking the disaster she helped to create. Wait until we hear from a former cop as he weighs in on her performance and that of those currently charged with keeping a fragile peace. And the path of cash into the pockets of terror groups is easier than you might believe. I'm Ed Berliner. The path to fact begins without the hype. Time to take a hard line for Tuesday, April 28th. Buckle up. Start with the Daily Snapshot.
So it's easy for the news to capture young people rioting and looting. It's easy to show that, but you ain't ever gonna say why.
First of all, this is not a war. It's not a war. We want peace, but y'all gotta give us that. If y'all keep coming and taking everything we got, we gonna take what y'all got. We not playing out here. This is not a war, but we want our rights.
I'm a lifelong resident of Baltimore. Too many people have spent generations building up this city for it to be destroyed by thugs who, in a very senseless way, are trying to tear down what so many have fought for. Tearing down businesses, tearing down, destroying property, things that we know will impact our community for years.
Disappointed that we cannot be more responsible in an embarrassment that we have nationwide in our community. This is not protesting. This is not your First Amendment rights. This is just criminal acts doing damage to a community that is challenged in some ways, that do not need this and do not need to be harmed in the way that we have today.
Professional cops in Baltimore were outflanked by a band of rioters, teenagers, and adults who weren't taught in the art of urban warfare, yet turned a major American city into a flaming nightmare. The world once again sees our dysfunction. We are once again seen as a nation out of control and unable to deliver either honest law enforcement or be populated by people who understand the difference between civil protests and turning into potentially murderous criminals. So where do we go from here? Our guest is Executive Director for the Law Enforcement Alliance of America. He's a former cop, former member of the American military, and has testified before Congress. Welcome James Fotis to the Hardline. Jim, pleasure to have you on the show.
How are you, Ed?
We have to start right out, I guess, with what the mayor of Baltimore said, which has so many people still seething, where she basically indicated that because of a freedom of speech, she was willing to give these rioters the opportunity to destroy the city. I have spoken to friends of mine in Baltimore, and they are absolutely incensed that anybody would think that way. But what about from a cop's perspective?
Obviously, police officers, their job is very, very difficult to begin with. And then the person who is out there supposedly going to support the police officers goes and gives carte blanche to the people that are going to riot to bring, and additionally, people that may not even be from the city that are coming in to assist these rioters and cause them to make more out of the riot than possible. So she goes ahead and says, we'll give you the ability to destroy as much as you want. Give them some room. What do the people to think in
What does
Baltimore?
it do it to the cops, though, Jim? Because the cops are the ones who have to stand there. They have to take it. And already they're sitting back on their heels because they're afraid to do anything in just about every major American city.
Of course, because who's the first line of defense? The police officers. So now police officers and everybody around the world sees these police officers have to stand there and take it. They see kids jumping on cars, smashing in their windows. They see rioters looting, burning, and they have to stand there and take it. What does the world think of police at this point? They have their hands tied. They know that they can get away with anything. We cannot let this happen. These police officers are trained professionals and they're not allowed to do their job. And what happens, sure, sometimes there are bad eggs in any profession. However, the police officers in Baltimore are trained police officers. They're trained professionals, and they've been taking care of that city for years. Most of the city, their revenue comes from tourism. What are the tourists going to say? I can't go to that city
Well, certainly
anymore.
in Baltimore, you have the Inner Harbor, you have
Yes.
the football stadium, you have the baseball stadium. Everything is right there off Interstate 95, and you're only 40 miles north of Washington, D.C.
Right. people are going to say, do I want to go to Baltimore where the police have their hands tied by the mayor, by the governor?
Do you really believe that their hands are tied by the mayor?
I do believe it. I do believe it. I believe that their hands are tied by the mayor. I believe that their hands are tied by the commissioners, the 2 new commissioners that they have in Baltimore. I believe that their hands are tied by their own fear that as soon as they take action, they're not going to be able to actually do anything without getting in trouble. If you were told on your job, if you made the wrong statement that you're going to lose your job or go to jail, what would you do? You'd be very leery about what you're doing.
Let's go back to this whole bad apples idea, because we have to address that. There are bad cops in America today. There is no doubt about it. There are cops, male and female, black and white, Hispanic, whatever you want, who bend the rules, and I call them bullet heads, because quite frankly, that's the way they feel, that's the way they act towards people. But there are good cops out there. We know that. Really, to serve and protect is what they want to do. Isn't it fair to say, though, that we have law enforcement has got to be faster going after the bad cops? They've got to be more purposeful about it, and they've got to punish them immediately, because if that would have happened, then maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Police, for years, have taken care of their own, have policed themselves.
But isn't that the wrong thing to do, though?
However, you've got to look at, you've got internal affairs, you've got grand juries. The evidence goes before a grand jury, and then what happens? It goes through an impartial group of people, and they're the ones that make the decision, not a group of people from within the police department that decide whether these police acted in the right way or they acted in the wrong way. Of course, many times people don't agree with the grand jury and they can't get the information out. Maybe we should start releasing some of that information. We know that any type of civil group that is a watchdog of police, it never works. It's happened in many, many cities.
But we've got to make it work, don't we? We've got to make it work in this society.
Well, what happened is, now you got to look at the federal government. What's happened with the federal government? We've militarized our police forces, and then the federal government comes in and says, you're doing the wrong thing. We've given them all kinds of equipment. We've made them military SWAT teams. So then we come in and we do a consent decree. The federal government takes over the police department. The hands are tied. The police are afraid. You can't do your job. It makes it more difficult.
But you will admit that we need some sort of transparent concept here. Because as you even said, maybe we need to get the information out from the grand jury, something. Because here we have an investigation that's taking time. And granted, we all know investigations take time. You want to get it right the first time. Right. But you've got to be open anymore, because no matter what happens, no matter who's involved, you have people who believe you're cops, you're covering it up, and you're not going to give us justice if you don't open it up.
And Ed, you're 100% correct. But if you take and you look at the broad picture of law enforcement, you've got 40 million traffic stops a year. You've got police officers going to homes on calls when people are ill. Most of those traffic stops never end in any type of violence. You've got very few shootings by police officers. In fact, the number of minorities that are killed by police officers are dwarfed by the number of non-minorities that are killed by police officers every year. It's really very, very difficult to say that police officers are doing the wrong thing. So when there is an incident, it has to be looked at, acted on fast, but bringing in a civilian who has no idea what goes on within the police department makes it even more difficult.
I've only got about 30, 40 seconds left.
Okay.
We saw pictures of people coming out of stores with goods in their hands, people burning cars. What happens when you have a cop standing right there? Aren't you supposed to shoot the bad guys? Aren't you supposed to shoot or do something to stop the lawbreakers?
You're supposed to stop the lawbreakers, but if your hands are tied and your mayor says, give these people a free hand at doing whatever they want, let them destroy when they want to destroy. What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to take action? 19 police were injured yesterday. 144 cars were destroyed. What are you supposed to do? Whose hands are tied?
Do you fear that we're going to have a very long, hot summer in this country? And you know exactly what I mean, and not temperature-wise.
I think we're going to have a very long, hot summer, and I think it's going to become more and more difficult. And my fear is that countries around the world are going to look at us and say, what's happening in America?
And absolutely, we have to answer that back one way or another, but we have got to solve this, and we have got to stop trying to hide whatever it is.
I agree with you.
A pleasure, my friend. Thanks so
Thank you.
much for coming in. I'm sure we're going to talk a whole lot more about this as the summer goes on. All right, the military morale problem. What kind of example are our military leaders setting for the rest of the force and the American people? This is The Hard Line. We continue after this.